My name is Simone Ardell. I am 39 years old. And 4 minutes ago, my father stood at the head of his own birthday table and announced that the woman he married 6 years ago is now the CEO of the company I gave 11 years of my life to build. The room is a private dining room at Erling Jensen's on Poplar Avenue in Memphis. It is the kind of restaurant my father used to say was for other people back when we ate at Waffle House on Sundays, because the booth by the window was always free. That was before Karen. The tablecloths here are white linen. The lighting is the warm amber kind that makes everyone look like they are inside a painting. There are 22 people at this table: aunts, cousins, my father's old business partner Lou, 3 board members I have worked beside for a decade. Nobody is looking at me. My father is still talking. He has a glass of Bordeaux and he is using the word transition and the word leadership and the word future, and Karen is beside him in a red dress, smiling the particular smile of someone who has been waiting for this moment for a very long time. Yvette is across the table from me. She is not smiling. She is looking at her water glass with an expression I have known since we were 9 years old. It means she is deciding whether to say something or stay quiet. She stays quiet. But here is what none of them knew. I had spent 14 months building a file that the Securities and Exchange Commission had already assigned a case number to, and in 6 days, the investigator assigned to that case was going to make his first call. This is how it happened. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where we share real-life stories about family justice, quiet strength, and the moments that change everything. If this is your first time here, drop a comment and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a story. To understand what happened at that birthday dinner and what happened in a federal proceeding 9 months later, you have to understand what it means to be a forensic accountant, and what it costs when you spend 11 years finding other people's fraud without ever looking at your own family's books. I became a forensic accountant because numbers do not lie. People lie. Documents get altered. Narratives get constructed and reconstructed depending on who is telling them and what they need the story to be. But a number, entered on a specific date, in a specific ledger, connected to a specific transaction, that number is there. It does not move. It does not soften with time or rearrange itself to protect anyone's feelings. I passed my CPA exam in 2008 and my Certified Fraud Examiner certification in 2010. By 2012, I was doing contract forensic work for 3 mid-size firms in Memphis and 1 in Nashville. I was good at it. Not in the way people say they are good at things to be polite. I mean, I was the person firms called when the situation was bad enough that they needed someone who would not flinch at what she found. My father's company was called Ardell Logistics. He started it in 1994 with a borrowed truck and a handshake agreement with a warehouse distributor on the south side of Memphis. By the time I joined the company in 2011, it had 14 trucks, 31 employees, and annual revenue of $2.3 million. It was not a large company. It was a real one. My father had built it with his hands and his stubbornness and an understanding of the Memphis freight corridor that he had assembled over 20 years of doing the work himself. I came in as the financial controller, not because he asked me to, because I looked at the books in 2010 and saw 3 inefficiencies that were costing the company $140,000 a year, and I told him and he said, "Fix it." So I fixed it. And then, I stayed. Over 11 years I restructured the accounts payable system, renegotiated 4 vendor contracts, brought in 2 outside investors as minority shareholders, a formal arrangement, documented, SEC compliant. Something I insisted on because I knew what undocumented investment arrangements became when things went wrong and grew annual revenue from $2.3 million to $6.1 million. I know these numbers the way I know my own handwriting. I was there for every dollar. My father married Karen in the spring 6 years ago. I want to be accurate about my reaction at the time. I was not opposed. My mother had passed 11 years before, the same year I joined the company, and my father had been alone for a long time in ways that showed in small things, the refrigerator with almost nothing in it, the way he stopped going to church, the particular flatness of his voice on Sunday phone calls. Karen was warm and social, and she made him laugh in a way I had not heard in years, and I was genuinely glad for that. What I did not examine closely enough was what Karen was interested in. She asked questions about the business from the beginning. Good questions, reasonable questions, the kind a new spouse asks when she is trying to understand her partner's life. I answered them. I was patient with them. She started coming to the office occasionally, just stopping by, bringing lunch, chatting with the staff. The staff liked her. She remembered names. She brought birthday cards. In 2019, 3 years into the marriage, my father gave Karen a formal role, Director of Community and Stakeholder Relations. It was a new title, created for her. I had not been consulted. I found out in a staff email my father sent on a Tuesday afternoon. I called him. He said Karen wanted to be more involved and he thought it made sense. I said, "What does that role actually do?" He said, "Community relationships, the kind of soft networking that the company had never been good at." I said, "Okay, and what is her compensation?" He said, "We'll figure it out." I filed that conversation under something I would return to later, and did not return to for 8 more months. That is the flaw in me that I have had to sit with. I am a forensic accountant. I have been hired by companies specifically to look at what is being hidden. I found $780,000 in misappropriated funds in a family-owned distribution company in Nashville in 2017. By looking at nothing more suspicious than the petty cash log and 3 vendor invoices. I found it in 4 days. It took me 2 years to look at my own father's company with the same eyes. The office on Airways Boulevard smelled like diesel from the loading dock and burnt coffee from the machine in the break room that nobody had cleaned properly since 2015, and faintly, near the back offices, the cedar of the old filing cabinets my father had brought from his first warehouse location and never replaced because he said they worked fine. He was right. They did work fine. They worked fine, and they held records going back to 1998, and I knew every drawer. Yvette has been my best friend since the 4th grade at Kingsbury Elementary. She is also a CPA, which is either a coincidence or evidence that we were always going to end up the same kind of person. She does external audit work for mid-size businesses across the Mid-South. We have lunch on the first Friday of every month at a diner on Union Avenue, where the booths are vinyl and the coffee is bad, and we have been going there since 2004 and have never once discussed switching to somewhere nicer. She knew the company. She had heard me talk about it for 11 years. She knew the numbers, roughly the way you know the outline of something a friend has described many times. She also knew, before I fully admitted it to myself, that something had changed. She said it once, in 2021 at the diner, carefully, how much access does Karen actually have to the accounts? I said she didn't have direct access. She wasn't in a financial role. Yvette nodded and drank her coffee and said, okay, she did not push. I should have asked myself why she was asking. My father turned 60 on the 14th of October. A Saturday. Karen had organized the dinner Erling Jensen's, 22 guests, a set menu, a private room. She had sent the invitations herself. She had chosen the flowers. She had selected the wine. All of this was fine. All of this was what a wife does for her husband's 60th birthday. I arrived at 7 with a card and a gift, a framed photograph of my father and his first truck, taken in 1994, which I had tracked down through an old friend of his who had a copy. I had it restored and framed in oak. I thought he would like it. I thought it was the right thing. Karen greeted me at the door of the private room. She said I looked great. She said she was so glad I could make it. She said it with a warmth that was perfectly calibrated and landed, as it always did, slightly off, not enough off that you could point to it, just enough that you noticed it and said nothing. The dinner was good. The food at Erling Jensen's is always good. I sat between Lou Briggs, my father's original business partner who had retired 6 years prior, and a cousin named Darnell who lives in Atlanta and whom I see twice a year. We talked. I ate. The wine was a Bordeaux I would not have chosen, but which was better than I expected. My father was happy. I want to say that because it is true. He was genuinely happy at that table in a way that was good to see. He laughed 3 times during dinner in the loud, unguarded way he used to laugh when I was a child, before my mother got sick, before the years of just the two of us and the company and the work. Karen had done that for him, the laughing. Whatever else was true, she had done that. At 9:15 he stood up. He said he wanted to say something. The table went quiet the way tables do. He thanked Karen for the evening. He thanked everyone for coming. He said 60 felt different than he expected. He said the company was in a strong place and he had been thinking about the future. Then he said he had made a decision about leadership. He said that Karen would be stepping into the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective the 1st of November. He said he would be moving to a chairman position, less day-to-day, more strategic. He said he was proud of what the company had become, and he was confident in this next chapter. He did not look at me when he said it. Lou Briggs, to my left, went very still. I felt it rather than saw it, the particular stillness of a man who has known someone for 30 years and is watching that person do something he cannot undo. Karen smiled and touched my father's arm and said thank you and said she was honored and would not let him down. The table applauded. 3 board members I had worked with for a decade applauded. My cousin Darnell, who did not know enough to know what he was applauding, applauded. I had a fork in my hand. I set it down on the plate. Carefully, without sound. Yvette was across the table. She looked up from her water glass and found my eyes. She did not smile. She did not make a sympathetic face. She just looked at me directly, steadily, the way she has looked at me since the 4th grade when things were hard, and she did not know what to say, and she knew that not looking away was the thing that mattered. I looked back at her. I did not look away either. My father finished speaking and sat down, and Karen refilled his wine, and the conversation restarted around the table as if the ground had not just shifted under 11 years of my work. I stayed for 40 minutes after the announcement. I said the right things to the right people. I hugged my father at the end and he held on for a second longer than usual, which I noticed and did not comment on. I said happy birthday. I meant it. I drove home on Poplar Avenue with the windows up and the radio off. I parked in my driveway. I did not go inside. I sat in the car for a long time, longer than I want to say, with my hands in my lap and the photograph I had brought for my father still on the passenger seat, because in the moment of leaving I had forgotten to give it to him, and he had not asked. Then I picked up my phone and I opened the company's accounting portal, the one I still had full access to because nobody had thought to remove it, and I started looking at the accounts payable ledger for the past 18 months. I looked for 4 hours. When I stopped, it was past 1 in the morning, and I had 7 pages of notes on a legal pad, and the particular clarity that comes when you find something you were hoping you would not find. I went inside. I sat at my kitchen table. I said out loud to nobody I have to build the whole thing. That was the decision. That was the moment I stopped filing it under something I would return to later. I called Yvette the next morning at 8. She answered on the first ring. I said, I need to show you something, and I need you to tell me if I'm seeing what I think I'm seeing. She said, when? I said, today. She said, I'll bring the coffee. We met at my kitchen table at 10. I laid out the 7 pages of notes and the printed ledger pages, and she looked at them for 25 minutes without saying anything. I know Yvette's silences. This one meant she was building the picture slowly because she wanted to be sure before she spoke. She looked up and said, "How long has this vendor been in the system?" 14 months. "And you've never heard of them?" "Never. No contract on file, no service agreement, no corresponding delivery logs." She looked back at the ledger. 14 months of payments, 22 payments, average $35,000, total $780,000. She set the paper down. She picked up her coffee. She said, "Simone, just my name." The way she says it when she is about to say something she wishes she did not have to say. I said, "I know." What I had found across 14 months of accounts payable records was a vendor called MKR Consulting Services. No physical address in the company records, only a P.O. box in Germantown, Tennessee, no contract, no scope of work documents, no deliverables on file. 22 payments, each between $28,000 and $47,000, each approved with a 2-signature authorization. One of the signatures was Karen's. The other was a board member named Philip Sears, who had joined the board 8 months after Karen became Director of Community Relations. Ardell Logistics had 2 outside minority shareholders, both of whom I had brought in under a formal SEC-compliant arrangement in 2016. They held a combined 22% equity stake. The payments to MKR Consulting were being drawn from the operational fund that included their invested capital. They had not been disclosed in any of the quarterly reports I had filed, because the quarterly reports I had been filing were based on the accounts I had access to, and MKR Consulting payments were being processed through a secondary payables account I had not known existed until I went looking at one in the morning with 7 pages of notes and a growing weight in my chest. A secondary account. Created 11 months ago. I had not been notified. I had not been consulted. I was the financial controller of this company. I spent the next 6 weeks building the file. I worked at night after my regular client work, at my kitchen table with the cedar smell of the old files I had taken copies of before my building access had been quietly reduced, something I had noticed in September, and filed under administrative oversight, and now understood was not oversight at all. I pulled every document I had legitimate access to. I organized the MKR payments by date. I cross-referenced the payment dates against Karen's calendar, which she had shared on the company network and never unshared. 4 of the payment dates corresponded to days she had marked as external meetings stakeholder. No names. No locations. I filed a Freedom of Information request through the Tennessee Secretary of State for MKR Consulting Services, LLC. It had been registered 8 months before the first payment. The registered agent was a law firm. The sole member listed was a name I did not recognize. Darien Polk. I hired a private researcher for $1,200 to find Darien Polk. It took her 4 days. Darien Polk was Karen's niece. She was 26 years old and worked at a nail salon in Collierville and, as far as the researcher could determine, had no background in consulting of any kind. I sat with that for 1 evening. Just 1 evening. Then I moved forward. The Dodd-Frank Act of 2010 established the Sex Whistleblower Program. Tips can be submitted through the Sex Online Tips, Complaints and Referrals portal. A valid submission receives a TCR number, a confirmation that the tip has been received and assigned for review. If the SEC opens an investigation and a sanction of over $1 million results, the whistleblower is eligible for an award of 10 to 30% of the collected funds. I was not thinking about the award. I want to be clear about that. I was thinking about 2 minority shareholders who had invested in good faith in a company I had vouched for, whose capital was being used to fund payments to a shell company run by a 26-year-old in Collierville who had never consulted on anything. I submitted the tip on a Tuesday evening in December. The confirmation email arrived at 11:47 p.m. TCR number assigned. I printed the confirmation page and put it in a manila folder and labeled it with a date and put the folder in the locked fireproof box I keep in my bedroom closet between my passport and my mother's death certificate. Then I sat at my kitchen table and did not move for a while. There was one night, a Wednesday in February, 2 months into building the file, when I drove to the gas station on Summer Avenue near my house to get a bottle of water because I did not want to be in my apartment anymore, and I did not know where else to go. I sat in the parking lot for 2 hours. The gas station fluorescent lights turned the concrete a pale yellow-white. A man filled his tank and drove away. A woman came out with a plastic bag and looked at her phone and drove away. I sat there. I was not crying. I was not thinking clearly about anything specific. I was just sitting somewhere that was not my kitchen table and not my father's company and not the weight of knowing what I knew. After 2 hours, I drove home and went to sleep and got up the next morning and kept building the file. Yvette, during all of this, did not give advice I had not asked for. She met me at the diner on the first Friday of every month, as always. She drank her bad coffee. She asked how I was sleeping. I said fine. She knew I was not fine, and she knew I knew that, and she did not press. Once, in March, she put her hand on the table near mine, not on mine, just near it for a moment. Then she picked up her coffee again. That was enough. That was exactly enough. For 14 months I showed up. I attended the November board meeting where Karen was formally introduced as CEO. I sat at the same table I had sat at for 11 years. I had a notepad and a pen, and I took notes, and I asked 2 procedural questions about Q4 projections in the tone of a person who has no reason to ask anything else. Karen ran the meeting well, I will say that. She was prepared and organized, and the board members who did not know what I knew responded to her with the particular warmth that competent women in leadership positions earn from rooms that have decided to give them a chance. I watched this happen. I said nothing. My father was at the head of the table in his new chairman capacity. He looked comfortable, relieved even. He had been running that company for 28 years, and I think the weight of it had been sitting on him in ways he had stopped noticing because they had been there so long. I understood that. I did not stop understanding it just because of everything else. Christmas came. I went to my father's house. Karen had decorated in the way she always did, thoroughly, warmly, a house that looked like someone had thought carefully about making it feel like Christmas. The food was good. My cousin Darnell was there with his wife and their 2 daughters. We ate and we talked, and I helped clear the table, and I loaded the dishwasher, and my father and I watched 20 minutes of a football game we did not care about because that is what we have always done at Christmas, and I was not going to stop doing it now. He asked how work was going. I said well. He asked if I was seeing anyone. I said not currently. He said he worried about me being alone. I said I wasn't alone. I had Yvette, and I had my clients, and I had my work. He said that wasn't the same thing. I said, I knew. There was a moment, late in the evening, when the house had gone quiet, and it was just my father and me in the kitchen, and he was making the decaf he always makes too strong, and he turned from the coffee maker and looked at me with an expression I could not fully read, something careful, something almost apologetic, and he started to say something. He said, Simone, I want you to know that the company, his phone rang. Karen calling from the other room. He looked at the phone, and then at me, and then he answered it. I turned and looked out the kitchen window at the backyard where the oak tree had been since before I was born. I waited to feel angry. I felt tired instead. Just tired. I said goodnight at 9:30. I drove home. I did not turn the radio on. If this story is hitting close to home, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Your story matters too. The closest I came to saying something was in February. I was in my father's office. He had asked me to come in and review a vendor contract, one of the legitimate ones, a renewal for a freight insurance policy I had managed for years. We were at his desk. It was a normal Tuesday. The cedar filing cabinets were behind him. The window behind those looked onto the loading dock. He initialed the renewal page and handed it back to me and said, "Good. Thank you," the way he had said it for 11 years. And I looked at him, at his hands, at the pen still in his hand, at the way he set it down on the desk, and I thought about everything I knew and everything I had built, and the TCR confirmation number in the fireproof box at home, and I felt the words rise up. I said, "I'll file this today." I picked up the contract. I walked out. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in March. Company letterhead. Formally addressed. Signed by Karen in her capacity as CEO, and co-signed by Philip Sears as board chair. It informed me that my role as financial controller was being eliminated as part of a structural reorganization. My final day would be March 31st. A severance package was outlined, 8 weeks of pay. They thanked me for my 11 years of service to Ardell Logistics. 8 weeks. 11 years. I read the letter at my kitchen table at 7:22 in the morning with my coffee going cold beside me. The morning light in my kitchen in March comes through the east window at a low angle and hits the edge of the counter and makes a stripe of white light across the tile floor. I watched that stripe while I read the letter a second time. My hands were not shaking. My hands were very still, the stillness of someone who has been expecting something and has finally received it and no longer has to wonder when it will come. The termination letter was the last piece. I had been waiting for something that would establish motive beyond financial gain. A company that terminates its financial controller, the person most likely to find what I had found 8 months after an irregular secondary account is opened, does not look like coincidence in a federal filing. It looks like consciousness of guilt. Patricia, my attorney, had told me that. She had said, "When you file, we want the record to show a pattern." The letter completed the pattern. I picked up my phone. I called Patricia. She said, "What happened?" I said, "They terminated me this morning. Letter dated today, silence for 2 seconds. Then that's actually helpful for us." I said, "I know." She said, "Are you okay?" I thought about that. The kitchen tile, the stripe of morning light, 11 years of arriving early and leaving late and knowing every number in every ledger and building a company from $2.3 million to $6.1 million in revenue and being handed 8 weeks of severance pay on company letterhead. I said, "I will be. File everything." She said, "I'll have it submitted by end of day." I hung up. I sat at the table for a while longer. The coffee was cold, and I drank it anyway. There was a moment, the evening before a Wednesday, the last ordinary day before the letter, when I had been at my father's house to return a casserole dish my aunt had left there at Christmas. Karen had answered the door. My father was in the back. While I stood in the doorway handing over the dish, Karen said, in passing, almost too casual, "Gerald has been sleeping so much better lately. I think stepping back from the day-to-day was really good for him." She said it warmly, as a piece of good news, as something she thought I would want to hear. I said, "I'm glad," and I meant it, the way you can mean something true while also seeing everything around it clearly. She closed the door. I walked to my car. I sat for a moment before starting the engine. Then I drove home and finished building the last section of the file. The SEC opened a formal investigation in June, 3 months after Patricia submitted the complete filing. The investigator assigned to the case was a woman named Agent Dorinda Marsh, based in the Atlanta regional office. She was methodical and unhurried, and she asked questions by email and then by phone and then in person at Patricia's office over the course of 2 meetings that lasted a combined 6 hours. I answered every question with documents. That is what 14 months of preparation looks like. Every question Agent Marsh asked, I had an answer with a corresponding exhibit. The MCare consulting payments, 22 transactions, dates, amounts, authorization signatures, Darien Polk's registration as sole member, the nail salon in Collierville, the secondary payables account, opening date, authorization signatures, the absence of disclosure to minority shareholders in any quarterly filing, the termination letter, dated 4 days after a routine audit inquiry from one of the minority shareholders that I had forwarded to Karen per standard protocol and which had apparently prompted the restructuring decision. The minority shareholders, a man named Bernard Okafor and a woman named Priya Mehta, both of whom I had brought in personally in 2016, and both of whom had invested on the basis of financial disclosures I had prepared and personally stood behind, had been interviewed separately by Agent Marsh the week before our meeting. I did not know what they had said. I knew what the records showed. In September, the SEC issued a formal order. Karen Ardell and Philip Sears were charged with securities fraud under Section 10B of the Securities Exchange Act and Rule 10b-5. The order detailed the MKR consulting scheme, the undisclosed payments, the misappropriation of shareholder funds, and the termination of the company's financial controller as a material act in furtherance of the concealment. I found out from Patricia on a Thursday morning. She called at 8:15. She said the order came through. She read me the key findings. I sat at my kitchen table and listened and did not say anything until she was done. She said, "The total sanction they're pursuing is $1.4 million. You're eligible for a whistleblower award." I said, "What happens to my father's company?" She said that was a separate question and one that would take time to answer. I said, okay. The hearing where the formal findings were presented to the board and the shareholders was on a Tuesday in October. Patricia was there. Agent Marsh was there by phone. Bernard Okafor and Priya Mehta were there in person. I was there. My father was there. He sat at the end of the conference table, not the head, not his usual position, just an end seat, as a chairman of a company that was in the process of having its leadership formally sanctioned. He was wearing the gray suit he wore to every serious meeting, the one with the faint pinstripe that he had owned since 2009. He looked smaller in it than he used to. Karen was not there. Her attorney had advised her not to attend. Agent Marsh presented the findings by phone in the flat, precise tone of federal proceedings. Numbers, dates, transaction records, the registration documents for MKR Consulting, Darien Polk's identification as the sole member, the authorization signatures, the secondary account. It took 38 minutes. When it was over, Philip Sears's attorney began a sentence, and Patricia set the full exhibit file on the table, 94 pages, tabbed, organized by category, and said, "We have complete documentation for each finding referenced in the order." Philip Sears' attorney finished his sentence and did not begin another one. My father looked at the exhibit file. He looked at it for a long moment. He did not look at me. Bernard Okafor, to his credit, said nothing cruel. He asked 2 procedural questions about the recovery timeline and the company's operational status going forward. He was composed. He had every right not to be, and he was. At the end of the hearing, I was in the hallway putting on my coat when I heard my father's footsteps behind me. I knew them. I have known them since I was 4 years old. He stopped a few feet away. I turned around. He looked at me for a moment, really looked, the way he had not looked at me since before Karen, since the years when it was just the two of us and the company and the work. His eyes were the same eyes. They had always been the same eyes. For 1 second I saw something in them that looked like what he could not say and probably would never say, and that I had needed him to say for a very long time. Then he looked away. He looked at the floor. His jaw moved once and closed. He walked past me to the elevator. He pressed the button. The doors opened. He got in. He did not look back. I stood in the hallway. The overhead lights were the particular institutional fluorescent of office buildings at the end of a long day. The carpet was gray. It smelled like the neutral cleanliness of a room where difficult things happen regularly. I said nothing. There was nothing to say that the 94-page exhibit file had not already said more clearly and permanently than I ever could. I put on my coat. I walked to the stairwell. I walked down 4 flights. I pushed open the door to the street, and the October air in Memphis hit my face, cool and dry, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it. Then I walked to my car and drove home. The sex sanction was finalized in January. Karen and Philip Sears each received civil penalties. Karen was barred from serving as an officer or director of any SEC reporting company for 7 years. The $780,000 in misappropriated funds was ordered returned to the company's operational accounts, from which Bernard Okafor and Priya Mehta's losses would be made whole as a priority distribution. The whistleblower award, processed 4 months later, was $94,000. I did not expect it to feel the way it felt. It did not feel like winning. It felt like a number attached to a correct record, which is what it was. I put it in a savings account and did not think about it for 3 weeks. Ardell Logistics brought in an independent interim CEO while the board reconstituted itself. Lou Briggs, my father's original business partner, agreed to serve as an advisory board member during the transition. He called me the week after the hearing. He said, "Your father knows what you did and why. He's not ready to say it yet." I said I understood. I did understand. Understanding something does not mean it does not cost you. My father called in February. We talked for 11 minutes. He did not apologize. He asked how I was. He asked about my work. He said he missed having me at the company. There was a long pause near the end of the call, and I thought he was going to say something real, and then he said, "I'll let you go." I said, "Okay, Dad." I meant it without resolution or expectation. Just, okay. Just Dad. My mother's cousin Renee sent a card. It said, simply, "Your mama would have done the same thing." I put it on my refrigerator. In March, I registered Ardell Forensic Consulting, LLC, with the Tennessee Secretary of State. My own firm. My own name. I signed the operating agreement alone, which I had always intended, and I filed it myself, which I also intended, and I paid the registration fee with the debit card linked to the account I had been building for 2 years for exactly this purpose. On the first Monday in April, I arrived at my new office space, a single-room suite on Beale Street, 2nd floor, east-facing windows that let in the morning light at 7:15. The glass door had my name on it. The sign had been installed the Friday before. I had not seen it with the morning light on it yet. I stood in front of it for a moment. Simone Ardell, CFA, CPA, Ardell Forensic Consulting. The letters were clean and precise and exactly right. I unlocked the door. I went inside. I set my bag on the desk and I stood at the east window and I watched the morning come up over Memphis, the light moving across the rooftops, the city doing what it does every morning, reliably, without asking permission from anyone. Yvette came by at noon with lunch from the diner on Union Avenue. She set a paper bag on my desk and looked around the office and said, "This is good." Not enthusiastically, just factually. The way she says things that are true. I said, "Yeah, it is." We ate lunch at my new desk. The bad diner coffee was in paper cups. The morning light had moved to a lower angle by then. The sign on the glass door was visible from where I sat, catching the light, my name correct and complete, and mine. I used to think that loyalty to family meant extending benefit of the doubt indefinitely. That watching and waiting and giving people room to be better than their worst actions was a form of love, and that to stop doing it was a form of giving up. I do not think that anymore. There is a difference between patience and willful blindness. I am a forensic accountant. I have spent my career finding the difference between what a record says and what actually happened. I know how to read a ledger. I knew how to read what was in front of me years before I let myself do it, and the years I spent not reading it did not protect my father, or the company, or the shareholders. They only delayed the damage becoming visible. My name is on a glass door on Beale Street in Memphis. I pass it every morning at 7:15 when I arrive, which is when I always arrive. The sign catches the light at that hour in a way that is clear and exact. No ambiguity in it. No charitable interpretation required, just the accurate record. I have a framed photograph on my desk, the one I brought to my father's birthday dinner and forgot to give him in the chaos of everything that came after. My father and his first truck, 1994, before everything. He is young in the photograph. He is squinting into the sun. He looks like someone who is about to build something and knows it. I look at it when I need to remember that the beginning of something is not the same as the whole story. I used to think the worst thing you could do to someone you love was to hold them accountable. I now think the worst thing is the alternative. 11 years of a correct record dismantled over 14 months, and it took an SEC case number and a 94-page exhibit file to put it back. The cost of that correction was real. My relationship with my father is not what it was. Some things do not reassemble exactly as they were, but there is a sign on a glass door with my name on it, and the record is accurate, and I can read a ledger without flinching. That is my story. An accountant who spent 14 months finding fraud in her own family's company and finally stopped pretending she did not know what the numbers said. If this reminded you that the most honest thing you can do for the people you love is to tell the truth about what you see, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.